Yes.
Okay, I've also put the link in the chat in case anyone's internet lets them down. So actually, I'll just go back. So resistance and emotions in action research is what I'm talking about, but underneath is really the question that I want us to consider afterwards. So how might our values and beliefs hinder how we can tell our research stories? So I'm Tara and I work at the University of Nottingham in England, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the research I undertook for my doctorate, which was reflecting on a professional challenge that I had, but also because of my long-held values and beliefs was somewhat of a personally driven crusade. So I work as a widening participation professional at the university, and for anyone who doesn't know about widening participation, there's a link there. And really I'm enacting government policy to tackle disadvantage and inequality in accessing higher education. And my role really is a linchpin between the university and local schools and communities, working across the university, all the different factions of the university, with academic colleagues, with professional colleagues, with the estates management, and so on and so forth. So as Gordon and Whitchurch say, they're a very flexible and unboundaried role at the university, which in a large traditional university such as Nottingham is still relatively unusual. And I basically coordinate a menu of activities, including subject taster sessions, campus visits for schools, in-school presentations, and training up university students to be mentors for local pupils to reduce educational disadvantage, which has been something that's really driven my career to date. And it's a passion that's shaped what I do and who I am. And so because of this passion and commitment to tackle educational disadvantage, it made it very difficult for me to understand the reality at the university that most of my academic colleagues had no interest or appetite to take part in widening participation work. I found this very difficult to understand. Surely they would want to be enabling what can be transformative educational opportunities. So I was confused, frustrated, dismayed, and also quite sort of personally and professionally insulted, because it didn't seem to matter how I positioned or promoted widening participation work, but it was only a very few colleagues, or maybe the same few, who were interested in taking part. So I was really addressing an issue there of professional concern. And to understand why this was the case, I undertook action research with 3 academic colleagues as my co-researchers, and we were exploring the process of designing and delivering these taster subject sessions to understand what the barriers were for academics to engage in this type of work. And because we were working what we would call across this divide, professional and academic staff, inevitably there was conflict and confusion from the outset due to the structures in which we operated. For instance, our roles were on either side of this divide, but we also had differing experiences and understandings of widening participation. There was an inevitable hierarchy working with academic colleagues. There were issues of voice throughout, including when I positioned pupil voice, when the pupils came to these taster sessions as a useful feedback tool for my colleagues. There was a lot of emotion and resistance to that. And also ownership of the research, who actually owned this research during the fieldwork, but also then in the writing up, I had to really address my values to consider how I was representing my colleagues. So the strategies I used to try and mitigate against making this a single voiced or biased piece of research was nominal group technique, whereby we reached a consensus about issues that were important to the research through an iterative writing of statements until we found one that we agreed on for instance, why is widening participation important? Planning in and making safe spaces our shared planning, review and evaluative action research sessions around the research, sharing scaffolded lesson plan templates with my co-researchers so they could see how to develop their sessions, and also listening to not just what they were saying, but why they were saying it, what was driving the emotions, the resistance, the thoughts, the comments that they were sharing. So ethics were really important throughout the research. I was very aware of the fragility of our researcher relationships and therefore our professional relationships. And I tried very hard, but didn't always succeed, to value these, not just during the research in person, but also in my reflections, in my research diary and in the writing up. And a key personal challenge for me was this insider-outsider positionality. We were all insiders because we all worked within the university. However, they were academics and I was not. So I was the outsider in that context. I was an action researcher and they were not. So I was the insider in that context, and so on and so forth. We had experienced researchers versus my novice researcher. Their discipline was arts and humanities, mine was education within social science. So whilst the ambition was this lovely exchange of ideas and practices in a fluid and positive way, the reality was really balancing power differences, which impacted during the field work. And then again, when I was trying to make sense of the research in the writing up. And so it wasn't until I undertook the analysis that I became really aware of the assumptions that I was making about my co-researchers, about their values and their behaviours and their motivations to participate in the research. So I had 4 phases of research and they evolved one from the other. To begin with, I did thematic or inductive analysis where I looked across all the data sets, read them, and as themes rose to the surface, I was able to group the research and to get a sense of the sorts of themes and issues that I might be writing about. So there was hierarchy and identity and so forth. But that only gave me a surface level understanding, and one that really, in a way, confirmed the biases with which I'd entered the research. So then I undertook a more systematic and procedural approach to the research, which I sort of visually see as vertical analysis, where I use the plan, act, observe, reflect, action research cycle to show me the key moments of research and where change might be occurring, or perhaps knowledge was being constructed. Thirdly, I then looked across the research horizontally, as I see it, and looked at each of the 4 of us as an individual case or story. And that way I really began to see the narrative for each of us and how perhaps our positionality had changed or our values and beliefs had been perhaps challenged through undertaking the research together. And finally, I used the conceptual frames of collaboration, co-construction of knowledge, and action for social change to really enable me to challenge the process throughout. So I would ask myself, well, how truly collaborative was that moment? Or if change was occurring here, why was it occurring here and not at this other moment in the research? And through doing this analysis, I actually came to understand that we weren't different, we weren't oppositional, we were actually very similar, and we were facing a number of similar barriers to doing our work together, doing it individually. We all felt undervalued and isolated, and at times impotent in our roles. We all often felt unsupported, and we all wanted to change, and we wanted things to change. So we had far much more in common than I had assumed. And so for me personally, there was a huge amount of growth and understanding through undertaking this research. And we developed knowledge together about each other, about how we could work together in a far more collaborative manner going forward. But we also created knowledge about action research in higher education. We developed a strong professional bond with each other that continues way beyond the research. And we also developed a respect for each other's expertise and knowledge that we had each brought to the research. And that for me was hugely important, having entered the research feeling like the outsider, the imposter, and also assuming that my knowledge would not be valuable to my colleagues. And that is what I wanted to share with you today.